Welcome to Waiting on the Trade, a monthly comics book club for people who can't keep up with monthly comics. I'm Matt Ledger.
I'm Patrick Fitzgerald Fleck.
And I'm Bryce Manning.
This month, we're talking about George Takei, Justin Eisinger, Stephen Scott, and Harmony Becker's They Called Us Enemy. Now, in case you need a refresher, They Called Us Enemy is a look at the 4 years that a young George Takei and his family spent in a U.S. internment camp during World War II. It is a sad, funny, and somehow optimistic book that I think we're going to have a lot to say about, so we should probably get into it.
Let's do it.
But first, we gotta welcome Bryce back to the podcast because it's been a little bit. Bryce, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, it's been a while, huh?
Yeah, I feel like I haven't really talked to you in a while because the house search has precluded much gaming and Discord sessions.
Yeah, I think it was X-Men was the last one.
I was going to say, was X-Men on last one? My gosh.
Yeah, somehow, I think you've been at the end of both of the last rotations, roughly. And we'll fix that in the next rotation.
You're on next week, Bryce. What are we reading?
Yeah. We'll read about Jubilee turning into a vampire.
Okay. Yeah.
What a swerve from this book to that.
I feel like most anything's a swerve after this one.
I mean, I was going to talk about the fact that before we settled on reading this for timely reasons, I think, though, Bryce, you can kind of discuss as we get into it. We were going to potentially read the manga where virginity gives you magic powers.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Is it Cherry Magic? Is that what it's called?
Cherry Magic.
Yeah. 30 years of virginity can make you a wizard. I popped into Discord yesterday just to look up the title again from Bryce and I DMing. Which the first page of that I did actually really love because it just gets right into it. But
we're not talking about Cherry Magic.
About that book. Yeah, we're not here to Instead, we're here to talk about They Called Us Enemy, which, Bryce, I'm kind of curious why you decided to pick this book. I know you had reasons.
Yeah, so like you said, originally I was going to do something more lighthearted and maybe funny, maybe offensive, which was Cherry Magic. But yeah, with the current climate in the U.S. and things happening, all these attacks on Asian Americans, I kind of felt like this book would be very appropriate. And me being half Asian, I'm given this platform, which is your guys' podcast, and I might as well use it in a way that I can help with the current situation in my own weird little way.
Yeah, I mean, platform is an odd word because I'll have Pat pull the listener numbers at some point. I'm not sure how big the platform is, but also, yeah, if there's anything we can do to spread awareness of, at the very least, a good book that should at least expand people's worldview and knowledge of a thing that the U.S. did that the U.S. doesn't talk about that much, and obviously still impacts society today. I had actually found myself having to read a few articles and research just to sound a bad verb, I guess, because it sounds so casual, but brush up kind of on, especially since the pandemic started, the hate crimes that are going on against Asian Americans. And it's terrible. It's disgusting. One of them said that someone set a lady on fire in Brooklyn, and just, it's not okay.
Yeah, when we have a president who calls the COVID virus the Chinese virus, what are you going to do, right?
Kung flu.
Right,
yeah. Yeah, so I'll definitely link to, there was a very lengthy article in the New York Times that I think was probably the best article I read, though there was also one from, I think, Colorado Sun Times that was about teenagers talking about kind of their way of fighting back against some of the anti-Asian rhetoric and hate crimes. And that was interesting, too, in relation to this book, because the teenagers were very strident and aggressive in pushing back, and their parents were very much more like a keep your head down, ride it out sort of thing, which I think is a conflict.
That's a whole discussion, yeah.
Yeah, that George and his father had in this book too. So yeah, before we began the podcast, we settled on going through the book not in narrative order because the book is really dense. A lot of stuff happens in here, both narratively to George and his family and also just touching on events throughout World War II and afterward. So I think if we did that, we'd be here for 3 hours, and I don't think that's a good use of our time or the listeners' time.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to just pop through and sort of talk about like overall thoughts of the book, moments that stood out to you, any low points if you found any. I have a couple things that I think didn't quite work for me, but like overall, the book was. I was talking to Pat, and enjoyable is obviously not the right word, but I
Right.
did like. I was very glad I read it.
Appreciative.
Yeah, that's probably correct, Pat.
Yeah.
But I guess Bryce, I'm curious if how you came to hear about the book in the first place, because this is one that I know I had heard about, but I'm pretty deep into ye old comics world, and I'm not sure everyone would have heard about it. Although this did win an Eisner, I think, last year, so which is like the Oscars of comics. So
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. So, like I said earlier, with everything going on in the current climate, like I really wanted to put a spotlight on an Asian American author, and I found a few, but also being a huge Star Trek fan, uh, when I saw that George Takei had a comic, I was like, and it's about racism and prejudice against Asian Americans. I was like, well, this is perfect. I like George Takei, and this fits the times, and I think it's something that we should read.
how did you like it?
Yeah, overall, it's a good read, and I do think it would be fitting for this to be in a classroom setting, sort of like required reading material, maybe in like middle school,
Sure.
because it is. Yeah, we really don't talk about like the Japanese internment all that much in American history. As I'm thinking back to like when I was in high school or middle school, it was maybe a paragraph in a textbook.
Yeah. No, for me, it was a stark reminder because you always think of like FDR taking us out of the Great Depression, establishing all the great public works that he did.
Right.
And he also signed this horrific thing into law. So it just, there's more to one side to historical figures, and it's really easy to lose focus on the
Yeah.
humanity of it. Like, people aren't just one thing.
So I guess Bryce or Pat, like what moments in the book stood out to you as moments that either you think you'll remember or moments that were surprising to you?
I always got caught up in whenever there were scenes of George's parents trying to hide, or not hide, but trying to minimize the seriousness of their lives at the time. So anytime they're trying to seem like it's an adventure going on these train rides across country, and then it cuts back to the dad, and he's obviously worried about the future of his family. Those always hit me really hard.
Yeah, the one specifically on page 38 and 39 where they're on the train. I think it's to the Dakotas at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Can flip to that potentially, but
With the cute face of George being all excited about it.
yeah, that bottom right panel that's totally like an anime excitement panel
Yeah.
just kind of always gets to me in the couple times I had read through the book.
Or just like his mom used up space in her luggage to provide like candy and like little toys for them to stay entertained.
Distracted. Yeah.
Literally, they had to pack up their entire lives. Like, their house and possessions are going to be stolen from them. And she took the space to provide her kids like a sense of normalcy. That's just huge. That mom is awesome, by the way. The fact that she hid that sewing machine.
Yeah, that moment, a lot of the moments in the book that really resonated with me were George's parents having like couple moments.
Yeah.
Which one of them was George's dad at first being really angry that George's mom had brought the sewing machine with, and then just cracking up because of course she would. Like he just knows her
Right.
well enough that like, oh, this makes complete sense. And like, why did I not understand that this had already like I should have already known this had happened.
Just the ridiculousness of the fact that their lives would be in danger over a sewing machine. Like,
Yeah.
the absolute lunacy of everything is just hitting them.
Yeah, but at the same time, their lives were going to be in danger over a sewing machine. She was never
Right.
not bringing it. And the other moment between those two that really stood out to me was when they went for their like one Sunday drive that they got to go for,
Mhm.
and she just like quietly flips George's father's hat from the hat that's like about to blow off to the baseball cap. Like that was another nice moment where it's just kind of, I can't even imagine, first off, having to go through something like this yourself, like as like you a person, and then also having to do it as a parent
Right.
just kind of blows my mind. And the fact that those two at least could lean on each other a little bit was very touching.
I was thinking about this. It's absolutely horrible that children had to go through this, but to some degree, do you think it gave like the parents a means of muscling through? Like they can't slip into despair because they need to be strong for their kids.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Like having something to not live for, but having something to like keep your composure
To
for, I guess.
brace yourself. Yeah, like you're doing it. Personally, when I'm doing something for other people, these people I care about, it motivates me so much more than if I need to do it for
Doing it
myself.
for yourself, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think creating a sense of normalcy for their kids was just like a huge priority for the parents. But then you can also see that in like the community in general, like when they were staying at the horse track,
Mhm.
the entire community still they formed schools, they formed their own like newspaper. They still found a way to like group together and create a sense of like community. Like we're going to have to depend on each other as a group, and I think that just really speaks to like the strength of like the Japanese American community at the time. They were such they want to be American, but they can also continue having like keeping their own traditions and like their own education going in like the roughest of times.
Yeah, and like in some of the reading I was doing, it seemed like that was part of the reason that people were kind of frightened of the Japanese community, is that they were so successful and at the same time really hardworking and like also keeping to some of their own traditions, right? So it it's so just bizarre to me that your ability to be a good industrious person is what gets you targeted in a way.
Yeah, I mean, so before this, there was like the Chinese Exclusion Act in like the 1800s when a lot of Chinese immigrants came over to the U.S. to work on the railroads,
Mhm.
and these immigrants were taking jobs. I shouldn't say taking jobs. They were filling jobs that nobody else wanted to do because it was low wages and it was super dangerous.
Right.
But they were industrious and they were wanting to make a new life for themselves in the US. But all of a sudden, legislation was passed saying like, "Oh, these Chinese people are coming here to take jobs away from white Americans." Those people didn't even want the job in the first place, but they're trying to like fit into U.S. society, and then all of a sudden, it's like, "Oh, they're so
Because
hardworking."
they did. Yeah.
Yeah,
Just punished for it.
like now we got to like stop all immigration from China. And it's kind of like the same thing that happens here.
Yeah, I feel like this book left me thinking about so many weird cycles of American culture and politics and assimilation, especially near the front of the book. It talks about how Earl Warren's strategy was like specifically a divide and conquer strategy. And I know, Pat, you must have also thought about all the Scott Walker stuff and how his strategy was like a divide and conquer strategy in what,
Yeah,
2010?
it's so disheartening how people we haven't learned. Fear mongering is just used as a tool, and it doesn't matter who's the scapegoat for it. Pick a minority and make them the enemy. Make people scared of them.
Which Takei brought up at the end of the book with the Muslim ban reference at the end.
Yeah,
It's
which
a new scapegoat.
I didn't for some reason, I thought this book had come out further in the past than it had. Like I did not realize it was a 2019 book. I for sure if you had asked me before I started reading it would have told you it was like a 2016, 2015, 2016 book, like somewhere
Mm-hmm.
around there. So it being that recent and being able to touch on those recent events and the fact that we're in a like at least we still are, let's be real, because we were talking about it at the start of the podcast how people are committing hate crimes against Asian Americans,
Yeah.
like still in another cycle of this. Just like I'm glad that this book is optimistic because sometimes it's hard to be optimistic.
Well, yeah, it's the same thing as his parents in the internment camps. Like, if you're not optimistic, like
Yeah, then what are you doing,
if
right?
you aren't moving forward, you're just giving up, and that's not really an option. So, got to be optimistic, which is hard for me to say because, good lord, I have not been of late.
It has been a trying year.
So one of the things I think you mentioned, Bryce, earlier was that this would be like a good middle school required reading book. And I
Mm.
think there's something to that. And I think there's a lot of like power to the way the story is told in that it's a story you definitely could hand to a child and you could hand to an adult and they would both get, if not the same thing about it, like they would, like if not the same thing out of it, they would both get something out of it, right? Like, and it's a completely appropriate to hand to either. And I think there's a like a weird balancing act that comics especially sometimes do to do that. I guess some like regular books do too, but I feel like comics do it a lot because there's pictures, I guess maybe.
Yeah, and I think the art style of this was chosen specifically to cater towards a wider audience, right?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about the fact that to me this is very much a like the style of the individual panels is manga style and the style of the pages is American comic style, and that's really cool to me given the story that it's telling. Like it's an Asian American comic in that way, like in that it has an Asian art style, but it's paneled like an American comic.
Oh, you consider this to be an Asian art style?
I would. I mean, it's definitely more manga to me than anything else, I guess I would call it. Like,
Well, with it being all black and white, like heavy on the ink, it's definitely more of like a manga style.
Yeah, I was
There's
thinking more like comic strips in a newspaper kind of thing.
yeah, I could see that too. I mean, it may also be the subject matter potentially also, but like I'm still looking at this page of like this glowy anime page of George going on an adventure in Arkansas here. And
Sure.
like that's very manga to me, but the it's not a manga in that manga are usually like 4 to 5 panels per page, and there aren't really any gutters between panels and stuff like there are in this book. So it's very much a cross, which is cool given the subject matter.
Yeah, I think kids could digest this easier than say. I mean, my mother told me a specific title of a children's book. I don't remember it. I'm sorry, but there have been numerous books, at least a handful, that have gone over what it was like growing up in these internment camps. And I think it being a comic book is easier to get kids to read than, say, even a short story.
Yeah, yeah, and I know George Takei's his autobiography. Anyways, I know he's written about this in other mediums before too, but I think this one's more targeted at being able to share his story with a younger audience who maybe can't get through a biography, right?
Right. Well, if they go over the fact, yeah, he's got a couple of Broadway musicals, right?
A musical too.
Yeah.
That's how he met Nichelle Nichols.
Yeah, that was a cool panel. But yeah, this George's obviously been trying to get this story out any way he can. So this is the latest, and I think probably the widest reaching one, and hopefully the most successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good telling of the story. Touching on Becker's art a little bit more while we're sort of talking about it, anyways, I think the storytelling throughout is really strong.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty smooth, and I didn't really get lost or hung up anywhere. There are some things that I feel like are maybe not like quite like cartoon completely correctly, like some of the vehicles and stuff, but like it's all nitpicky, minor bullshit stuff.
Yeah, my only problem with this was their framing device got a little muddled as you went through.
Yeah, that was mine too. Is I think I expected it to come back and forth between that TEDx speech
Yeah,
and the past much more than it did, and then it also adds another framing device in the middle too about the FDR library talk, which is
Yeah,
really important.
for sure. I think they should have stuck with the library.
or of a TED Talk. Like, yeah, either one.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
the library is super important to the
Yeah,
actual like thrust of the narrative.
yeah. So I don't know. That was my only problem. It didn't really have any bearing on the story it was telling. It was just It would jump
Yeah.
back to present time, and it wouldn't be the TED Talk. It would be him talking at FDR's house.
Yeah, I think like page 36 is the first time it jumped back to the TED Talk, and I was like, oh, right, that's a thing that's happening.
Which, like, I don't even know if this needs a framing device. Like, I think it could have just been a story of young George Takei's life. But then I guess you wouldn't get the contemporary stuff.
Or you'd get it all at the end too, which like I did appreciate that at least those framing devices let them split the story up in a way where he could comment on the story as it was happening or show you like, oh, this is what my dad and I talked about because of this moment.
Yeah.
Without having to wait until the end of the book to get all of those, because I think that would have been a weird structure too. But yeah, I agree that the framing devices didn't quite pull it off.
Yeah, talking about powerful scenes, that conversation or argument he had with his father was pretty rough. I felt for both of them. Like, you can't like deny either's decisions that they made or feelings that they feel. Like, I don't blame his father for like putting the protection of his family above fighting for his rights as an American citizen.
Yeah, and like what else are you, I mean, at the risk of being on the wrong side of the argument, I guess, but like what else are you gonna do? Like they would have ended up getting shipped out anyways, right? Or worse.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost an impossible decision to make. So
Yeah. Which, speaking of impossible decisions, the one that got to me was the questionnaire.
yes.
It's such a catch-22, like the way that they wrote those questions.
Yeah, it was what? Will you fight in any place that we send you?
Yeah, wherever ordered, or and then question 28 was, will you renounce your allegiance to the
Loyalty.
emperor?
Yeah.
And pledge your loyalty to the U.S. And yeah, it's just like, why would you fight for a country that has just randomly picked up your family and placed you in a camp?
Well, destroyed
And
your
then,
life, right? Like, they don't have a home or any. They have no property anymore. Any
yeah,
business that they had is gone. Like,
can you be loyal to a country that's going to treat you that way? And at the same time, you're also, you know, denying your like ancestry and your identity, I
well,
guess.
yeah, I thought it was interesting that they explained in the book that by agreeing to that second question about renouncing loyalty to the emperor and saying that you're loyal to the U.S. means that you weren't to begin with.
Yeah.
These are American citizens. Like, his mother was born here. It's so insulting.
Yeah, the fact that some people actually said yes, yes, and then went to fight is like, I guess more power to them. They like this country more than I do some days.
Right. Yeah, and I did appreciate that George Takei listed like outcomes and said that each of them were brave in their choices that they made.
Yeah, because like Bryce was saying, like, how the hell do you answer this question that's just like a wildly monstrous catch-22? There is no good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the ones that did end up doing military service, the 442nd, ended up serving in Europe, and they suffered a lot of casualties in a rescue mission. And then they were only awarded like the second highest honor.
And yet still, when the kids are playing war at the internment camp, the Americans are the good guys. That really got to me.
Yeah, you get to be the Japanese this time.
They're fighting to see who gets to be the American while the Americans jail them in the middle of fucking Arkansas. Yeah, it's like it's such a weird book in that it's so charming at times, but the whole backdrop of the thing is this terrible, terrible thing. And I think that you're supposed to come away with with that feeling. Like I think that the fact that I felt that feeling from this book means it's successful. Because reading some of the interviews with George Takei and with Harmony Becker that I read, like that's kind of what it sounded like he's trying to convey is like, hey, this is a terrible thing that happened to us and many other families, but at the same time, it was also just my childhood.
I mean, life happens, you
Yeah.
know? Like,
Yeah.
you're going to go through shit, but life is still going to happen. And they're kids. You're going to have Christmases with Santa Claus. There are going to be bright moments.
That one was fun. the Santa Claus moment.
Like the beads of sweat you saw on Santa Claus's face as young
Which again, though,
George eyed him up.
like the same way the kids are fighting over like which of them gets to be the Americans. George Takei's problem with Santa Claus is that Santa Claus can't be Japanese. The dude's magic. He can be whatever you want him to be.
Well, I mean, he said his mother took him to the
No, I know. It's just like
Real,
it's
yeah.
one of those
to
things
the mall
where,
with the white Santa Claus. I mean, you barely see different racial Santa Claus now. So
yeah.
But George decided to keep it a secret just so his younger
yes,
siblings still enjoy it. Yeah.
good old George. I did. Oh God, talking about George and Henry, the fact that they named after kings of England.
No.
His father was such an Anglophile that he named his firstborn after his favorite English king, and then Henry VIII because his brother was born so big.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an endearing story with a very powerful message.
Yeah, I think another thing that's important about it too is that it does personalize this thing that for so many of us is 2 paragraphs worth of conversation we had in US history class in high school too. Like I was
Right.
trying to think, Pat, because we took the same US history classes. I know we discussed this.
Yep.
I don't think we went much deeper than it happened.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely went through Korematsu versus United States. I remember
Yes.
that. But yeah, we didn't really like go into detail.
This is just like it's 4 years of their lives. And the thing I think about too, or was thinking about, was the moments near the end of the war when everything's been so normalized for them that like this is the life that these kids know at this point, and any like freedom is scary. Bizarre.
Well, they don't have anything outside the camp at that point,
Right.
right?
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is like the US government has taken everything from these people. So you're setting the fact that George's family and George himself are so successful in the wake of this is just like wild to me because they basically start from nothing again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and then there was that point in the book where they were given an option to renounce their U.S. citizenship to stay in the camp,
Mm-hmm.
and the mom decides to renounce her U.S. citizenship because she believes her family will be safer inside the camp than outside facing prejudice and discrimination.
Yeah, it's hard not to feel like they were set up for that, right? Like
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
being shown how bad their life would be outside the camp and then given, well, you can renounce. We'll keep you here safe.
And then ship you off to Japan or, a country that you've never been to.
Right.
You might have ancestry from, but you've never been there.
Yeah, that was a tough one too. And I was worried for the mom there. It's like, oh my gosh, is she going to be like split from her family?
Yeah, especially because she hasn't really appeared in any of the post-war scenes at that point either. I don't know if she does appear in any of the post-war scenes actually, but most of those are George and his father talking. So
She's there with him at the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so I was like, oh, is she going to be, because she has family in Japan. She got that letter saying that she lost a cousin, an aunt, I don't remember,
I think
in
it
the
was
bombing.
an aunt and a cousin.
Yeah, but she has grandparents that still live there. So I was like, well, she might be deported, but she didn't, thankfully.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the panels on page 152 where George is kind of looking at the fence, the barbed wire fence, and it dissolves into ominous shadows
Mm-hmm.
because the camp is safe. Jeez. Just like, ugh.
Yeah.
Thank goodness we had some people actually on the
Stand
side of,
up.
hey, you can't renounce your citizenship. It's not a thing you could even like do.
Well, people, yeah, who recognize the trap that was being laid for these people. And it was harrowing to see. The book goes out and like lists who the representatives are that are saying or passing these awful things.
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, they got a little D next to their name, which is like these days I'm really like, okay, Democrats are the ones that are like speaking logically, they aren't gonna go. But obviously, not too long ago, we were equally culpable, and that's just
The thing that worries me about that is like, as people who feel there's only one sane party to vote for right now, like, what if that party starts slipping into insanity? Like, how much insanity are we willing to tolerate to not have to vote for the other insanity?
Well, I mean, hopefully being the sane ones. I don't. It's the argument like that the Trump followers are always like, oh, you're not going to point out Biden's mistakes. It's like, no, we are.
I wrote an entire blog post about Obama not closing Guantanamo Bay because I was pissed off at that dude. That dude's my favorite president.
You hold them accountable, regardless of which party they're for. People like governing us need to be.
Yeah, I'm not like worshiping at his feet, you know.
And if people did start slipping, I would like to think they would be voted out. I would really hope that we would have the means of replacing them.
Yeah, but who else do you vote for, Pat? Who do you vote for?
Well, this is the whole like you need to have
That's why
optimism. You got to have young people step up for those positions.
we're a viable third party.
Well, that's why like AOC and those people are so important. They're younger politicians trying to voice the minority rights and positions. It's very important.
This is another book like Pulp. Actually, it reminded me how Pulp made me feel like maybe I should be more civically active than I am. So it's a recurring theme in some of the comics we've read this year so far.
Yeah.
Are there any moments for you guys in the, I guess before the Takeis left the internment camp that we should touch on? Because I think otherwise we can start moving ahead towards some of the aftermath.
Yeah, Sakana Beach.
Yes.
Even I was like, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know how that sounds like son of a bitch.
Sakana Beach. Yeah.
Sakana.
Maybe tell me if this is not a thing I should say with the accent, maybe?
Yeah,
Heavily accented, maybe.
with a Japanese intonation, maybe, yeah.
That was cute though.
Yeah.
Kids are gonna be kids, regardless of where they are.
Bryce, when you say you're half Asian, how are you half Asian?
Which half?
I am half Filipino.
Oh, okay.
Which Filipinos are, in my opinion, this is a disclaimer, in my opinion, are complicated. Depending on, if you ask a Filipino person if they're Asian, they'll say yes. But if you ask a Filipino person if they're Pacific Islander, they will also say yes. Because the Philippines is just such a mixture of different cultures that it's really hard to lump us in like one group or the other.
Sure.
For example, a lot of Polynesians, in terms of like human migration, the jumping off point was the Philippines into Polynesia, and we share a lot of things culturally with Polynesia, such as the like ancient like grass skirts and like the way the old houses were built and stuff like that. But then at the same time, a lot of our food and like rice growing culture all comes from mainland Asia. And then we were a Spanish colony for like the longest time. So like 1/3 of our language is all Spanish.
Huh.
And then we became a US colony. And so a lot of our government and educational and all these other institutions were influenced by America. And then we were invaded by the Japanese, which I'm not sure if like Japan really left anything too permanent. I think they like modernized like farming and like rice production and stuff like that. So yeah, so the Philippines is kind of weird. We're like Polynesian, we're Asian. We can also claim to be the only Asian country that can claim to be Hispanic because 1/3 of our language is Spanish.
What?
So it's very. So I always just say I'm half Asian, half white when I have to go to the doctor and they have that like ethnicity or race question, like what are you? I just put like other or mixed. If mixed is an option because I'm like I don't know.
Yeah. So are you a second generation immigrant, or I guess like were your parents the people who came over from
Right.
So at least
So
one of your parents?
from the Asian side, yes, I would be second generation.
Okay. Huh.
From the white side, we've been around for quite a while.
Okay. What is the
Since early
half of you
90s.
that's not Asian?
That half is half Italian, half Irish.
Okay. So you got a lot going on.
Yeah. And then, I mean, my sister did a whole like ancestry.com DNA test.
Oh, nice.
And then that gets even more complicated.
Of course.
But yeah, so I always just say half Asian, half white, or quarter Italian, quarter Irish, half Filipino.
Okay.
I do have to say, like, with a lot of Asian immigrants, we do form our own communities. And this happened with like Italians and Irish
Yeah,
immigrants
sure.
as
Any
well. Like,
minorities come in.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say it also just happens among people, like-minded
right,
people who have things in common form communities, turns out.
right. But with like the Italians and Irish, it was easier for them to assimilate, and you don't really see like those little Italies anymore. Like the neighborhood name is still there, but it's not like all Italian people that live there.
Yeah, I'm thinking of San Diego, Little Italy, which I've been to a couple times, and I know you
Yeah,
likely have been
there's
as
like
well.
one Italian restaurant in San Diego, Little Italy.
Yeah. Not really Italian. There's like a New Zealand place there.
The thing with the Asian communities is that they've been coming over since the mid 1800s.
Mhm.
But we're still, I wouldn't say forced, but we still feel the need to be in our own like neighborhoods because we're still waiting to be fully accepted. What I'm was trying to say is that the definition of like what being white is, like it used to not include Italians and it used to not include Irish
Right.
people.
Mhm.
And then it seems like because okay, you're from Europe, like you can more quickly or more easily join the white people club or
Sure.
the American
The
club.
American Club, yeah.
But because Asians seem so foreign and so different and look so different, it's taking us a lot longer, and we still feel the need to be in our own communities. Like we still don't feel like we can move out of our own areas. I don't know if that makes any sense, like whatsoever.
No, it totally does. I was
Yeah.
kind of thinking about this the other day over breakfast, actually, after having like read through the book again and just thinking about how absurd it is that so much of this stuff that just like utterly upends and destroys people's lives is based on the way people look. And if people magically all looked the same tomorrow, so much of this stuff would just have to disappear because it'd be so much harder to be able to just be like, oh, those people look different. You'd have to find some other way to start dividing and conquering people, right?
We would find it.
Oh yeah, people could definitely do. I'm not saying it's impossible. Humans are humans, but
Yup.
just like there's no like we didn't make German internment camps, right?
Yeah, as far as I know.
Maybe we'll have to do a show notes thing for that one just to make sure. But like if we did, we didn't even get 2 paragraphs about that one in history class. And like part of the reason these things even existed is because A, people had existing resentment in the first place before the war even started, and B, it's a lot easier to pull people out of their homes when they look different because they look different, which is
Right.
yeah.
And the book brings up the fact that like the Japanese Americans are just inherently unable to become American citizens.
Yeah, which is
Or
such bullshit.
They
yeah,
can't
right?
assimilate. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you're tying citizenship to like race.
Yeah, I think that line and the line that was basically like we can't prove the Japanese Americans have done anything, and that in itself is suspicious.
Yeah.
Were the lines that like almost caused me to just like put the book down for a minute.
I wrote down that quote from Earl Warren, who became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
We have no reports of spying or sabotage or fifth column activities by Japanese Americans, and that is ominous because the Japanese are inscrutable. You don't know what they're thinking, so it would be prudent to lock them up before they do anything.
It'd just be nice if America as a whole understood like how the legal system and or justice is even supposed to work sometimes too.
I mean, we're all immigrants in this country. Like, we all shouldn't actually even be here unless you're like
Right.
100% Native American, American Indian. You know.
Yeah,
So it's very just like hypocritical the entire.
any sort of American trying to make claim to this country as like a land that is uniquely theirs for some like any reason, God given, like inherited, whatever. I don't like doesn't matter is BS. So
Yeah.
like it's a very imperfect thing that we came here and imposed upon the land, and now we're trying to make it work, and some of us are not doing their part.
Yeah.
Yeah, we gotta get more civically active, you guys. Maybe we need to start a new podcast.
Well, I used to be before marriage equality happened.
Yeah, I guess that's a thing we can touch on because we were talking about it before we started recording. Is that this book focuses solely on the Takei's time in the internment camp when George has been kind of like an activist for many different causes throughout his life. One of them is marriage equality, like the right for gay people to marry in the United States too. And really the only bit that pops up in the book is when his husband pops up in the two panels where he calls him a scamp.
Yep.
Yeah. What I was saying before we began recording is like that can be an entirely whole book on its own.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to kind of, especially if you're going to give this to younger readers too, to sort of focus in and say, hey, this is the story we're telling this time. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised if in the future there's another George Takei comic, because like I said, I think this is good, has been successful, and like there definitely is another story there. I think he's written about that in his biographies too.
You would almost have to, right?
Yeah.
He lived it.
Well, yes, but I mean, like, I think there probably is another, like Bryce was saying, it could be a whole nother book. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a whole nother book coming, given that this one went over as well as it seems to have. It is also one of those things that's thankfully a little less relevant at the moment.
Some places.
Some places.
We really should go into like trans rights, right? At this point.
Yeah.
That's yeah. Another part of the book that I thought was interesting was the guy that donated books to the different camps, and he would drive like for hours.
He was shot at too.
Yeah, and he
supposedly.
wasn't even shot at too. It just goes to show you that like not I don't want to like quote unquote white shame or like America shame like all that much. Like not every non-Asian American was a bad guy. And I think Takei pointed that out with the guy that delivered the books, and then also the lawyer that helped get Takei's mother back her citizenship, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think even like ourselves here, I think you and I, Pat, especially in the last year, have had like some of those moments of I'm remembering Pulp and I'm remembering this and I'm remembering some other conversations we've had where we're just like, God, people. And like especially like, God, American people. But like I think the reason I get so frustrated sometimes is that I actually really love this country. So to see it not measure up to the high goalposts I have set for it really makes me mad. Like I think I was telling you, Pat, actually semi recently that I thought about going back to watch Boston Legal, which is like my favorite television show of all time. And I think I would have been like, I would make me angry to see as many of the like social issues they discussed there 15 years ago still be relevant.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't really touched West Wing for a while.
Yeah, that's one that I think I started and I was like, I can't do this for roughly the same reason. So I think it's a thing where because of examples like the man who drove the books into the internment camp because he wanted to help people, and because of the lawyer who was like, hey, you can't renounce your citizenship at wartime. That's not even a thing. And even George Takei's optimism for the country and him sitting in that library at the end and being like, hey, this is a country where I was jailed in internment for 4 years, but now I'm sitting in a presidential library telling you why that was wrong. Like, this country's good, actually.
Yeah.
When the country fails to be good, actually, it makes me mad. But I do think the country can be good, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do like that the book is able to keep its optimism at the end.
Yeah, and I think especially handing this to younger readers, like it has to, right? Like you can't, you could.
Yeah.
And I think it's also just a part of George Takei's personality too. I don't think he would write a book that was a downer, especially from seeing him in other things and reading interviews with him in the lead up to recording this too. Like, I just don't think he would even have it in him to write a book that was like America sucks, because I don't think that's what he thinks, and that's refreshing. It's nice to have someone else who actually doesn't think America sucks, even though they've suffered some pretty traumatic events. Like, you could easily come out of those experiences and just think like, why am I living in this country? But that's not his mindset at all, and that's very cool.
He's a cool guy, that George Takei.
Yeah, he's all right. He's okay.
Should we move on to the time period after when he's become an adult?
Sure.
Yeah.
I particularly liked the part where he messed up Gene Roddenberry's name.
Yes.
Rosenberry? Yeah, he was.
That was a cute story.
I really like how in like every single panel of Gene Roddenberry being in this book, he's just smiling. He's just got this huge ass smile on his face in literally every single panel he's in. I hope he was actually like that. I really have no idea.
Roddenberry has his own skeletons.
Yeah, I'm not surprised about that, given some of the stuff I've heard, especially about Next Gen era.
I do like that they took the time to correctly pronounce Takei's name. It rhymes with okay.
It did really help with the intro of the podcast, as I said.
Because I'll even admit, like, I was guilty for calling him George Takei a lot.
Takei,
because that's
yeah.
how, even like to this day, like in media, people will say Takei. And I think like in like interviews and stuff, I think he's kind of just given up on like trying to correct people.
That would not be surprising to me, given the person he is. If he's just like, my name is not important, let's just say what I came here to say.
Yeah.
I did like how he reflected upon the fact that Sulu eventually does get to be a captain in Star Trek too, which is like,
everyone becomes a captain.
Well, yeah, there's that.
You live long enough in the Star Trek universe, they'll give you a ship. No, but representation matters, right? It's a big deal that they had a Japanese American, especially, I mean, after these events, on TV, on a very popular TV series, in a position of power too, right? Like he's a bridge crew officer.
Like he actually had screen time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With his shirt off too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like got the swagger a bit. Like, I don't know, he talks about how it was really important to him that the role was not like one of the roles he'd been getting where he was just a stereotype, and like a bad stereotype. I think that's part of the reason that all three of us like Star Trek, is that at its best, Star Trek like is intelligent about the way it handles characters and also is mostly about empathy.
Yeah. New Star Trek is bad. There we go. We said it.
I have no opinion because I haven't really seen anything since the J.J. Abrams rock out action movies, and those are definitely some science fiction movies that don't need to have the word Star Trek on them, but what are you gonna do?
The people who were kept in internment camps were eventually given basically reparations.
Yeah, which is like, interesting given that we're having a lot of conversations about reparations currently.
Yeah. I know the book says that Takei donated his money to the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles, which actually, as of this recording, just reopened yesterday.
Oh, nice.
After being closed because of COVID. And I haven't been there since I was a kid, but I do want to go back again. I just really hate going to LA.
Same, by the way.
LA is pretty awful.
We have opinions about Star Trek and we have opinions about LA.
But I do think if you are in like the little Tokyo area, that you should definitely check out the museum. It does a really good job. From what I remember, it does a really good job of just telling the stories of people in the US trying to make it. And Little Tokyo itself is really neat. It's always a fun time to go.
Sure.
Is it more of a Little Tokyo than Little Italy is a Little Italy?
I believe so.
All right.
Yeah.
And then we get into talking about some of the more current events, which I don't I gotta go back. I might even before I do the show notes for this one, go back and read the actual ruling for Trump v. Hawaii, because the fact that you could both overturn or like overturn
Korematsu,
Korematsu and also uphold this at the same time.
the
I
travel
just
ban. Yeah.
I want to see the gymnastics that got there for that one. Like, give me the legalese on that. Like, I was pre-law. I read a bunch of Supreme Court decisions, so like, I'm gonna go read this one.
I don't know how the court came up with that like conclusion, striking down one and then just enacting the exact same thing for a different group.
I guess probably. I mean, if I had to guess without having read it yet, they probably leaned on the fact that they're not American citizens potentially,
Yeah.
whereas the Japanese that we put into internment camps and erected barbed wire fences around are.
We're already citizens or having been lived in the U.S. Yeah.
Yeah. Although I think he says at one point, it might have been actually in that page, which I found really striking, which was just a portrait, like a half portrait of George's dad and a half portrait of his mom with like narrative captions down each side of the page.
Hmm.
But I think his dad applied for citizenship and didn't actually have it when they were
Right. He'd been living in the U.S., but he's not technically a
actually
U.S.
like
citizen.
quote unquote a citizen. So yeah, I'm gonna go read that court decision. It's one of the this one reminded me of how much stuff I've kind of like pushed off of my mind just because so much is going on has been going on in the world and in my own life.
Hmm.
And like I said, maybe it's time to to get caught up and maybe be a little bit more proactive. But guys, I think we somehow did actually reach the end of the book in a semi-linear fashion. I guess there's like a couple final things that I think I wanted to mention and I didn't get to were the lettering during scenes, well, the lettering throughout, but especially where in the scenes where people or things were singing was very cool to me. It's like a cursive lettering and the vowels are all stretched out. I think one of the ones I remember is at Christmas with Silent Night, and that's a trick that I haven't seen done very much or as well as it's done in this book to make the lettering actually feel like music as opposed to just words that are music. So that was cool. I mean, I think it's very, especially because this is George Takei's personal story. I think it's very tempting to get wrapped up in talking about the events of the story and the words more than the art too. But the art throughout this is like it tells the story very adeptly in a way that I think lets people get the message and also humanizes it, which I think is a big part of the book overall.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying my hardest not to end this with a quote from Star Trek.
No, please do, Pat. What are we even? Why do we have a podcast if we can't
Well,
end it with
it's from an
Star
episode
Trek?
that you don't like, Matt. I'm sorry.
Oh
Oh, is
no.
it? Is it? Wait, which one?
It's from the Drumhead.
Which one's the drumhead? Remind me again.
It's Admiral Seti is going crazy with a witch hunt to find a
I
Romulan
feel like
spy.
part of the reason, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like part of the reason we talked about this, or like when we talked about that episode that I didn't like it, was it felt too over the top, obvious, dumb to me that that would actually work.
Yeah.
I'm a moron. Like,
Yeah, should we revisit the Drumhead?
maybe actually, like people are shooting Pat, they would go for it.
Right. But yeah, Picard says Worf is confused because he's been suckered into the fear mongering that Admiral Seti has been using against the crew. And Picard is reassuring him that maybe she or someone like her will always be with us, waiting for the right climate in which to flourish, spreading fear in the name of righteousness. Vigilance, Mr. Worf, that is the price we have to continually pay. How is
Not
this
wrong.
resonating so well for like
I think I did like jump on that episode for being ham-fisted, but I think even then I recognize that that line is a good fucking line.
we have to do better constantly?
That's the thing I think is also unique about America is that America is good at having the ability to acknowledge its mistakes, but also is very good at having the cognitive dissonance to not acknowledge its mistakes at the same time.
Well, as the dad says in the book, people can do great things, George. They can come up with noble, shining ideals, but people are also fallible human beings, and we know they made a terrible mistake.
I did really like, speaking of quotes, the Obama quote that ended the book also, and especially the second, I guess the second part of the quote, which is that my liberty depends on you being free too. Like that really stuck with me. because I guess it's one of those things where we've talked about how these things go in cycles, and like eventually one of the cycles is gonna be bad for me if they keep going, right? Like they're all bad for me in that they like lessen the country and humanity, right? But like we can't really be America if we keep doing these sorts of things. So I guess would you guys recommend this to other people?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would too.
I think it's, as we said, easy enough to digest and isn't like, it's not overly a comic book and it's not overly a historical biography.
Hmm.
I really hope it's a book that just like libraries have. Like I really want almost every library in the United States to have this book
Right.
available. And like especially in the young readers section because
Mhm.
like kids are eating up young readers comics at this point. So if you leave this book in the young readers section, so many kids are going to read it.
Well, that's the thing. We were drawn to this because we know George Takei, right? Like we're fans of his.
I mean, so there's the thing, right, where like we're Star Trek nerds and that's why we came to it sort of.
Yeah.
Like notwithstanding all the other stuff Bryce talked about at the top of the episode, but like at the same time, that dude's got 10.4 million Instagram followers. I'm sure teens who have never seen a Star Trek in their life still love George Takei. So
Or
sure,
they've
they'll
at
all
least
help other
seen the
people.
"Oh my" meme.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we were trying to figure out where the "oh my" started. It's like I remember it. That's like his catchphrase, but I don't know where it came
I
from.
don't either, actually. I was trying to think of that the other day because I was thinking of some of the other stuff that I know. Like, he's in Futurama, correct?
I mean, yeah, he's one of the celebrities in a jar, head in a jar.
And like, is he in the show that shall not be named, also known as Big Bang Theory? I'm sure he must be at some point, right?
I'm sure they got him if they could.
But yeah, speaking of shows, I would also recommend watching AMC's The Terror Infamy, which I've told Pat about a couple times, because it has George Takei in it, and it's literally like they took his life because it's also about Japanese internment.
Okay.
They literally took basically the story from the book, but then they inserted a shape-shifting ghost that murders people in the camps.
See, so Kat, my wife, and I have watched the first season of The Terror and really liked it. And I've heard good things about the second season also, but it's a complete like 180, like
Yeah.
from being a thing about Arctic ships to being a thing set in a Japanese internment camp. So that's one we've been meaning to check out, and we probably will. I've seen you guys have like linked it in Discord a couple times in the last week while I've been lurking.
So if you like your horror and also want to learn about racism and prejudice, then yeah, you should watch that season.
Pat, do you have any recommendations?
Well, I have scoured the internets. I thought going along with the theme of representing Asian American comic book writers and illustrators, I found a series which I've heard of before and have been meaning to read. Superman Smashes the Klan by Jean
Ooh,
Lewin Yang.
that's one we should read for the podcast sometime because I have been meaning to read that also.
Yeah,
Let's put
looks
that on
really
the list.
it looks really good. I also found a Green Lantern Legacy by Ming Lei and Andy Tong. It looks like a Chinese version of the Green Lantern.
Yeah, I have also heard good things about that, I believe.
And then if you want to go for a similar kind of comic book, but much heavier because of the media that it covers, like the events that it covers, Mouse, of course, by Art Spiegelman, is a similar. It's a comic book style dealing with very heavy events of the Holocaust. It's a man depicting his grandfather's, I believe, story of the Holocaust, but through anthropomorphic mice.
Have you read any of that, Pat?
I did. I own it.
Oh, okay. See, I thought you had. I think I had the first book, but I was never able to track down the second.
Yeah, no, it's a really well done book that tells its story very uniquely, and I think it hits that much harder. I had similar feelings while reading this as I did when I was reading Mouse.
Yeah, I think I didn't really have anything that I was gonna that I had read recently that I could think of that I was like, oh, okay, this is a pretty direct line from They Call Us Enemy to this. But one that I've been meaning to pick up because again, I've heard a lot of good things. I think it's also won awards. Is John Lewis's book called March, which is
Hmm.
a depiction of his time as a key member of the civil rights movement in America. And I think John Lewis recently passed away. It might have been last year.
Mhm.
So that's one that I know, like, everyone keeps recommending to read that one, and I think it, again, would be in a very similar vein to this. So that may be one that ends up appearing on the blog at some point, I would imagine. If I get around to reading it, it's on the list. Well, all right. I think that is going to do it for this month's discussion of They Called Us Enemy. As always, if you want to get in touch with Pat or myself, you can find us on Twitter as @WattPodcast. You can also email us at waitingonthetrade@gmail.com and read more comics-related goodness at mattreadscomics.com. Bryce, do you want people to find you online?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram at Duo Maxwell, DuoMaxwell, 3 L's at the end.
I was gonna say all compliments for the episode can be paid to Bryce.
You'll find plenty of pictures of cats and food, just like on Susie's Instagram.
I was gonna say that's what Instagram people like, though,
That's what
right?
it is. Yeah.
Myself, I've never made an Instagram post, though I did have an account for a little bit.
They're not
They're
even
cat.
my cats. Yeah, they're not even my cats. They're my
They're
friends.
other people's cats.
Oh, is it Cello? You got a picture of Cello in there?
Yep.
Very cool.
Wow. Well, Bryce, thank you for coming on. This was a good book and a good discussion, and I really appreciated you coming on to talk about it with us.
Yay. Glad to be here.